I need to tell you something that happened 8 nights ago. Something that sounds impossible, but I swear to you, it's real. Every word I'm about to say is true. I was sitting alone in an old cemetery in Prague, the kind where the air itself feels ancient, whispering through cracked stones and crooked trees. It was midnight. The city slept beneath a thin, silver fog, and I was kneeling at a grave I had spent 3 long years trying to find. My grandmother's. My Yaya. The one person whose love made my childhood feel like it could never break. And there, under that pale moonlight, as tears blurred her name on the granite, Jesus appeared beside me. He didn't come with thunder or light or wings. He came quietly, and he answered the question that has haunted me since I was 7 years old. Why don't my prayers get answered? What he showed me that night didn't just change my understanding of prayer. It broke open everything I thought I knew about faith, silence, and love itself. Before I tell you what happened, I want to know something. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this space between night and morning. And if what I'm saying touches something deep in you, consider subscribing. It helps me keep speaking the truth I once kept buried. I'm recording this now from a hotel room in Prague, the Czech Republic. The walls still hum with the echoes of what I saw. It's 3:12 a.m., and though my body should be heavy from filming all day, scenes for The Chosen, I can't close my eyes. Because what he told me about prayer and why so many prayers seem unanswered has changed the way I see every single thing. Every relationship, every breath, every heartbeat. Let me go back and tell you how I ended up there. My grandmother, my Yaya, was the foundation of my childhood. She was the one who taught me how to pray. Really pray. She made every night feel sacred, every meal a small ceremony. She'd laugh, and the whole world felt safe again. She came to America from Greece when she was just 16, worked 2 jobs most of her life, sent money home, and still managed to fill our house with the smell of olive oil, fresh bread, and unconditional love. When I was 7, Yaya got sick, cancer. I can still see the pale green of that hospital room, the hum of the machines, the sharp scent of disinfectant, the way light flickered across her thinning hands. She'd always seemed invincible to me, like a saint with an apron and tired feet. But there, she looked small, fragile. I remember whispering, "Yaya, why doesn't God answer our prayers?" She smiled the way only someone who has seen both suffering and heaven's edges can smile. "My little Jonathan," she said softly, "God hears every prayer, but He answers in ways we don't always see." She fought for 8 months. I watched her fade, and I prayed like a child bargaining with the stars. Every night I asked, why isn't God listening? What happens to our words? Do they disappear into nothing? When she died, something inside me cracked. The grown-ups tried to fill the silence with phrases like, "It was God's will and she's in a better place." But none of it helped. I didn't want comfort. I wanted answers. As I grew older, that question, why prayers go unanswered, followed me like a shadow. I studied theology. I devoured books. I asked priests, pastors, professors, even skeptics. Each answer was partial, like fragments of a map missing its center. Even after I was cast as Jesus, studying the scriptures about asking and receiving, knocking and doors opening, faith moving mountains, I still felt like I was standing outside something I couldn't enter. 3 years ago, I made a decision. I would find my grandmother's grave no matter what it took. She'd been buried in Prague, among distant relatives our family had lost track of decades ago. I hired a genealogist, sifted through records, traveled twice across the ocean, only to return empty-handed. But this time, filming in Europe gave me one last chance. One free day before my flight home. One more try. I found a map that mentioned a vast cemetery called Olsani. I spent 6 hours with a local guide walking through rows of weathered stones, some half swallowed by ivy, others leaning like tired soldiers. We found names close to hers, but never hers. The sun was dropping behind the old city's skyline when my guide pointed toward one last section, graves of immigrants from the mid-19th century. I almost didn't go. I was cold, hungry, and ready to surrender. But something, maybe love, maybe hope's last spark, pulled me onward. We passed through iron gates that creaked like the opening of an old memory. And there it was, a simple grey marker with her name carved into the stone, a small cross above it. The dates, nothing fancy, nothing polished, but it was hers. I fell to my knees. Every year I had searched for her, every prayer that had hit the ceiling and fallen back into my chest, every unspoken ache. I let it all out. I told her about my life, about the chosen, about how much I wished she could see it. I told her how I missed her, how much I still needed her wisdom. Then it came, the same question that had haunted me since I was 7, out loud this time, to the cold air and the sleeping city. Yaya, I said, my voice breaking. I still don't understand. Why didn't God answer our prayers the way we begged Him to? What does it mean that He hears us? If the outcome is silence, do prayers vanish? Does He say no more than yes? The cemetery didn't answer. Even the wind seemed to pause. I sat there surrounded by thousands of graves, and for the first time I felt smaller than my own questions. And then I did something I'd never done before. Instead of turning to scripture, or a priest or another book, I turned directly to Jesus. Not the Jesus I play on camera, not a figure in stained glass or sermons, but the living presence I had talked about my whole life. I closed my eyes, hands trembling, and whispered, Jesus, why don't my prayers get answered? The air changed. It was as if the world exhaled. The darkness thinned, not with light exactly, but with presence. Someone was beside me. I didn't need to open my eyes to know. It wasn't frightening, it was familiar, like realizing someone you love has been sitting quietly with you the whole time. And then I heard Him. Not with my ears, but in that deep place where truth lands before language. Jonathan, He said, I'm not ignoring you. I'm inviting you. Your prayers are not lost. They are seeds. Some bloom where you can see them. Some grow roots where your eyes cannot go yet. Some wait for a season you haven't entered. And some are answered in you before they are answered around you. He didn't lecture. He didn't explain with formulas. He simply showed me. Thread by thread, how every silence had shaped something in me. How each unanswered prayer had led me to someone I needed to meet, a lesson I had refused to learn, a strength I didn't know I could carry. Losing Yaya still hurt, but suddenly, the silence wasn't empty. It was an invitation to keep asking, to keep knocking, to trust that the God who seemed quiet was not absent, but building something I couldn't yet name. When I opened my eyes, the cemetery hadn't changed, but I had. The question that had haunted me for 30 years didn't vanish. It simply found its companion. Hope. That's why I'm speaking to you now at 3 in the morning, with Prague still outside my window, its lights flickering like candles across the river. because what he told me changed how I see prayer. And maybe, just maybe, it will change something for you too. If you've ever wondered why heaven feels silent, why your words seem to disappear, I want you to know what I heard. You are heard. I took a deep breath, the first real one in years, and whispered to the night, the answer is coming. Sometimes as yes, sometimes as no, sometimes as not yet, and sometimes as me again. Not to test your faith, but to be with you in it. I looked up at the stars barely visible through the fog and said, Jesus, I've carried this question for 30 years. I've spoken your words as you, and still I don't understand why prayers seem unanswered. Help me see. The wind shifted, and then he spoke again. Turn around. I did, and there he was, sitting on a stone bench, calm, simple, real, no glow, no aura, just presence. You want to know why your prayers don't get answered? He asked. I nodded. Then I'll show you, he said, standing and holding out his hand. What you're about to see will change what you think you know about prayer, about faith, about asking. I reached for his hand, and the world changed. The moment I took his hand, everything around me dissolved. The cold air of the cemetery, the weight of my grief, even the dim city lights fading beyond the gates, it all melted into light, soft and infinite. I felt weightless, like I had stepped outside time itself. The world I had known, the stone, the soil, the sorrow, had given way to something more vast than language could hold. We were somewhere else now. It wasn't heaven, not in the way I'd imagined it as a child. It wasn't clouds or golden gates, it was alive, an expanse of radiant motion, like being inside a heartbeat that never stopped. Colors moved as though they were breathing. Every hue hummed with sound. The air was full of resonance, as if love itself had become visible. Jesus stood beside me, calm and familiar. He didn't glow with blinding light. He simply was. His presence filled everything and yet didn't overwhelm anything. The first thing you need to understand, he said, his voice carrying both tenderness and gravity, is that unanswered doesn't mean ignored. What happens when someone prays is far more intricate, more beautiful, and more intentional than you can imagine. I turned slowly, trying to take it in. What surrounded us felt like the architecture of meaning itself. Walls of shifting radiance, rivers of gold and silver light running through them, alive and deliberate. I wanted to ask where we were, but he was already answering the question forming in my heart. You're in the house of petitions, he said, smiling slightly at my confusion. This is where every sincere prayer passes through when it leaves a human mouth or a breaking heart. What people call silence is only a doorway, Jonathan. What they think of as delay is simply the next chapter in an eternal conversation. As he spoke, the air rippled and opened into a vision. Streams of light flowed in every direction. Thin, bright ribbons crossing like living threads, weaving into one another. Some glowed gently, others pulsed with fierce color. Each one carried a rhythm, a frequency that felt familiar. Each of these, he said, is a prayer. I watched in awe. The lights moved like water, crossing, merging, dividing again. Some vanished into distant horizons, others returned brighter than before. Every request ever offered flows through this place, he continued. But prayer isn't a lever to pull. It isn't a transaction, it's participation. I stared at him. The word participation echoing in my mind. What do you mean? He looked at me with that steady kindness that holds no impatience. Earth is a workshop. Every life is a curriculum, one designed to teach love, forgiveness, courage, sacrifice, and trust. When someone prays, they aren't trying to convince me to join their plan. They are stepping into mine. He gestured toward one of the brightest streams. It shone like molten silver threaded with sunlight. This one began when you were a child, praying for your grandmother's healing, he said. You thought it failed. Watch. The stream slowed until it almost stilled, and suddenly, within its glow, I could see fragments of my life. Memories I hadn't visited in years, my grandmother's hand in mine, my family gathering around her bed. The years that followed, the people I met, the words I spoke, the roles I took, the patience I learned through pain. The light touched them all, revealing how each moment had been quietly transformed by that prayer. Some prayers bloom where you can see them, he said softly. Some take root where your eyes cannot go yet. Some wait for a season you have not reached, and some are answered in you, before they are answered around you. I could feel the truth of it, deeper than thought. Every silence, every no, every heartbreak had shaped something holy inside me. You call it no, he said gently. I call it forming you for a greater yes. I looked up at him, tears burning my eyes. Are you saying outcomes don't matter? He smiled, the way a teacher smiles when the student is just starting to see. Outcomes matter more than you realize, but you measure them too soon. You judge them at the seed's burial, not at its bloom. You mistake silence for absence because you haven't yet learned to recognize answers that arrive as courage, as restraint, as peace when the path closes. His eyes glimmered. You rarely thank me for the no because it hurts, but every tear is gathered here. None are wasted. What feels like delay is alignment. For others, for timing, for protection, for preparation. You call it waiting. I call it weaving. I wanted to fall to my knees. He continued. Here's the first truth about prayer. Not everyone receives the same kind of answer. Not because I'm judging them, but because each soul prepares itself for different responsibilities in the kingdom I am building. The air vibrated around us, alive with unseen movement. There are levels of participation, he said. Levels of awareness. Some hearts can carry larger assignments because they have learned to love through disappointment. I thought of all the sermons I'd heard, the tidy categories, yes, no, wait. So you're saying there are levels of prayer? Jesus nodded slowly. I'm saying prayer is vaster than anyone has dreamed. Remember when I told my disciples that in my Father's house are many rooms? I wasn't being poetic. There are infinite assignments, infinite ways to grow. Every prayer enrolls you in that growth. I stood silent, my mind spinning, as he guided me toward another stream. This one shimmered like moonlight passing through water. The second truth, he said, is that prayer rarely surprises the soul. Deep down, every person senses when their plea aligns with what they were made for. I thought of times when a prayer felt heavy, off-key, forced, and other times, rare and luminous, when it felt like I was echoing something heaven had already begun. But what about desperation? I asked. What about people who cry out in emergencies and healing never comes? He turned to face me, his expression full of compassion that could shatter stone. There are no wasted prayers, he said. Every cry is received. Every outcome is chosen on a level deeper than panic, not with the conscious mind, but with the eternal heart. The soul cooperates with what will serve its highest growth and the highest good of all it touches. I swallowed hard. So when my grandmother died, despite all our pleading, Our prayers didn't fail. He shook his head gently. They did exactly what they were meant to do. They poured courage into her nights. They drew your family close. They trained your ears to hear in the quiet. They prepared you to carry compassion. You could not have learned another way. I couldn't speak. My throat closed, tears spilling freely. The silence I had resented for decades now pulsed with meaning. The third truth, Jesus said, is that prayer doesn't end when you stop speaking, it expands. Most people think prayer is the reduction of the infinite into words, but it's the opposite. It's an explosion of participation. When you pray, you join currents far larger than your fear or your hurry. He motioned toward a cluster of lights swirling like a constellation being born. See that one? It's a prayer realizing its full reach. Every relationship it passed through, every person it touched, every conflict it softened, it all served one design: to grow love. I could see it now. Prayer as motion, not message, as music, not transaction. The fourth truth, he said, is that answers are both immediate and gradual. The moment a heart turns toward the Father, heaven is already moving. But the unfolding, the shaping of people, the alignment of timing, may take what you think of as years. I watched as some streams moved swiftly, while others lingered, glowing slower, deeper, like embers waiting for the right breath. Why do some prayers move faster than others? I asked. Because some souls live closer to awareness, he replied. They practice trust and surrender. They walk already half in heaven. When they pray, the flow feels natural. Others must still learn that prayer is not control, it's communion. He led me to the edge of a luminous expanse where the lights converged like galaxies. The fifth truth, he said, is that reunion is real, but not what people expect. When someone prays for a loved one, for comfort or reconciliation, they are joined, truly joined by others, friends, family, saints, all those who have gone before. These are not sentimental visitations. They are partnerships of love. I stood speechless as radiant forms appeared within the glow. Human shapes woven from light, faces peaceful and aware. They help the petitioner discern, review motives, understand lessons, Jesus said. Some call it intercession. It's coordination, heaven working with earth. Every part of me trembled. He turned back to me, his eyes fierce now, full of aching love. The sixth truth, he said, is that hell, as most imagine it, doesn't exist in prayer. But separation from love does, and some hearts choose it. He gestured to a distant space, darker than the rest, streams of light coiled inward, trapped in loops that never advanced. These are requests imprisoned in resentment, pride, and self-hatred. They're not being punished. They're punishing themselves. Even they can choose love at any moment. I watched the tangled lights shiver, flicker, some finally stretching outward, rejoining the flow. Hope even there. He looked at me again. The seventh truth, he said softly, is that everyone, someday, sees the full impact of their prayers. Every ripple, every life touched, every unseen mercy that unfolded because they dared to ask. I thought of Yaya. So she knows, I whispered. She knows what our prayers did. She knows, he said. She saw how your pleading became your perseverance, how her faith trained yours, how those sleepless nights built the man who would one day speak to millions with understanding instead of doctrine. I closed my eyes, overcome. The silence I had feared all my life had never been empty. It had been orchestration. When I opened them again, Jesus was smiling. Now, he said gently, it's time to see what comes next. And as he reached out his hand again, light gathered around us. trembling with anticipation for what I did not yet know. Light rippled around us like a living tide, folding and unfolding in rhythms older than time itself. The house of petitions began to blur, its radiant corridors expanding into something even more vast. I could feel the shift, not a movement through space but through understanding. Jesus turned toward me, and though his face was calm, the air around him carried the stillness that comes before revelation. "There's more you need to see," he said. "We've looked at the structure of prayer, but not the heart of it. Now we go deeper into what happens when love becomes the answer itself." Before I could respond, everything changed again. The luminous expanse stretched into what looked like an endless horizon, woven from light and shadow, motion and silence. I realized we were standing at the threshold between answered and unanswered prayers, the border where human longing meets divine timing. Jesus gestured toward the horizon, and I saw something extraordinary. Rivers of light flowing like arteries through creation. Some shimmered gold, pulsing steadily with warmth. Others flickered faintly, as if struggling to find their current. "These are prayers that have forgotten they were heard," he said softly. "They still move, but they carry the weight of disbelief, of impatience, of fear. Yet even these I use. Nothing offered in sincerity is ever lost." He stepped forward, and I followed. The ground beneath us was no longer solid. It was living reflection, as if we were walking on the surface of understanding itself. Every step released sound, like faint music composed from memory. "Jonathan," he continued, "you have seen that prayer participates in my work. But there's another truth, the eighth one. What you call unanswered is sometimes just unfinished. A prayer never dies, it evolves. Every honest petition becomes a lesson that ripens across lifetimes, shaping souls long after the words fade." "Lifetimes?" I asked, surprised. "Are you saying our prayers come back?" "Not as repetition," he replied, "as resonance. A prayer doesn't recycle, it graduates. It becomes assignment, guidance, influence. Some become the whisper that helps another soul stand up again. Others become the compassion that pulls a stranger out of despair. Your grandmother's prayers for courage still ripple through you, through everyone you touch. They are alive." I looked at the rivers of light again, each one shimmering with meaning I could feel, but not yet grasp. "So nothing we pray disappears," I said. He smiled. "Nothing born of love ever vanishes. It simply changes form." Then he raised his hand, and the horizon bent again, folding inward until I could see time itself. It didn't run straight, as I'd always imagined. It spiraled like a helix, each moment touching every other. Scenes from my own life flashed around me. Childhood laughter, losses, triumphs, ordinary mornings, all suspended within one continuous thread of grace. "This is the ninth truth," Jesus said. "Time doesn't limit prayer. From this side, there is no before or after. The moment you pray, the echo reaches both backward and forward. It can comfort the child you once were and prepare the heart of who you have yet to become." I stared at him, speechless. "You mean prayers can touch the past?" He nodded. "And the future. When you intercede for others, you are shaping moments they haven't lived yet. What humans call coincidence is often the intersection of a prayer already answered beyond their awareness. You live inside a web of grace too intricate to untangle." He paused, letting that truth sink in. The rivers pulsed brighter, almost singing. "But you must understand," he said. "Love never violates freedom. Prayer can tilt the ground, open possibilities, draw hearts toward mercy, but it cannot force choice. Each soul must still walk willingly into its own redemption." I felt the weight of that, How often I'd begged God to change someone, to stop a heartbreak, to bend another's will toward what I believed was right. And yet, every person was still free. Every answer had to honor love's integrity. I watched the light twist upward like a spiral staircase, connecting earth to heaven. So prayer doesn't change your mind, I murmured. It changes ours. It does both, he said gently. When your heart aligns with mine, my will finds new expression through you. The partnership becomes seamless. You stop demanding outcomes and start co-creating mercy. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt alive, pulsing like a heart. Then he looked back at me, his eyes deep with fire and peace. The 10th truth, he said finally, is that every prayer, every sigh, every word whispered in darkness serves the evolution of all humanity. No one prays in isolation. Every plea joins a chorus that lifts the world toward awakening. Around us, I could see it now. Millions of lights rising like sparks from the surface of the earth, merging into a vast constellation. It was the collective heartbeat of creation itself. Every faithful prayer, he said, adds to this rising. When someone asks for forgiveness, the whole world breathes easier. When a person chooses love instead of vengeance, the universe tilts closer to healing. You are part of that movement. That's why no one's suffering is wasted. It becomes the womb of compassion for countless others. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed. The understanding was too immense, too tender. So, suffering has purpose. I whispered. Yes, he said, but not punishment. Suffering awakens. It strips away illusions of control, reveals what cannot die, and draws the soul closer to its source. But remember this, pain is not the only teacher. You don't have to break to grow. You can choose awareness in joy as well. He turned toward me fully now, his expression radiant but serious. That's why I brought you here while you still breathe. You don't have to die to learn this. Love, consciousness, union, they're available now. In every act of kindness, in every moment you pause to listen instead of react, in every prayer you refuse to abandon. The air trembled. The rivers of light surged brighter, converging into one vast current that surrounded us both. I could feel my heart expanding as if it finally remembered what it was made for. And then his voice softened, carrying something both intimate and eternal. There's someone waiting to show you what all this means in the language of love you already know. I felt my chest tighten. You mean? He nodded, smiling in that way that made the universe itself seem to exhale. Yes, Jonathan, it's time to see your grandmother. Light gathered around us like petals drawn toward the sun. The rivers dissolved into a vast garden blooming with colors no human eye had ever seen. Vivid blues that shimmered like music, golds that hummed with warmth, greens alive with consciousness. The air smelled of peace itself, and there, beneath a tree whose leaves whispered harmonies, sat Yaya. She looked young again, radiant yet familiar, her eyes reflecting every prayer I had ever whispered her way. She rose slowly, her smile the same one that once greeted me after scraped knees and childhood fears. My little Jonathan, she said, her voice carrying laughter and eternity. You finally made it. Before I could speak, she opened her arms. I ran to her, and the distance between heaven and earth vanished. Her embrace was solid, real, warm. So real I could feel her heartbeat against mine. I broke down in her arms, decades of grief dissolving into something purer than joy. I've missed you so much, I sobbed. She held me close, whispering against my ear. I know. But I was never gone, darling. You just forgot how near love can be. I pulled back, searching her face. You heard my prayers? Every one, she said, smiling through tears that glowed like morning dew. Even the angry ones, especially those. Love doesn't get offended. It listens until you remember. Jesus stood a few steps away, his gaze full of tender knowing. I'll give you time, he said softly. You have waited 30 years for this. And with that, he stepped back, leaving me in the arms of the woman whose faith had taught me how to speak to heaven. The garden around us pulsed like the inside of a heartbeat, alive with colors that moved as music. Time stood still, and all I could feel was this one truth taking root in my soul. What we call death is not separation, it's expansion. And in that moment, I finally understood. The silence I had feared was not God's distance, it was His nearness, waiting for me to listen. Her hands were warm, and for a long moment, I didn't speak. The air of that eternal garden shimmered softly around us, every leaf and petal glowing as if it were lit from within. It wasn't just beautiful, it was conscious, alive. You could feel love breathing through everything, the way wind moves through wheat. Yaya still held my face, her touch carrying that same gentle firmness that had once calmed me as a child. Jonathan, she whispered, there's something you must understand before you go back. I didn't want to hear the word back. My heart clenched. Back? You mean I can't stay? She smiled, the kind of smile that holds both joy and sorrow. You can't live in two worlds at once, my darling, not yet. You still have something sacred to do where you are. Her words echoed through me, the fear of returning to noise, to screens, to unanswered messages and hurried prayers pressed against my chest. Here, everything made sense. On earth, almost nothing did. Jesus stood a few steps away, hands folded, eyes steady on us. The garden light rippled around him like water around a stone. Listen to her, he said softly. Her words carry what you need to live what you've seen. Yaya's eyes held mine. The first thing you need to remember, she said, is that prayer is not something you finish. It's something you become. Every thought that carries love is prayer. Every act of patience, every choice to forgive. Those are prayers that don't require words. She led me along a path of glowing stones that curved beside a river of light. The air was fragrant like honey and rain mixed together. When I left my body, she said, I discovered that what we call dying is not departure. It's expansion. My world didn't end. It opened. And your prayers were the bridges that helped me cross. I felt tears rise. I thought I failed you, I whispered, that my prayers weren't enough. She shook her head. You never failed. You built a doorway between your heart and mine. Every tear you cried became light that guided me here. Prayer doesn't change love. It reveals it. We stopped at the edge of the glowing river. I could see shapes within it, people, memories, moments of laughter and grief swirling together. This river, Jesus said, joining us, is the current that carries all unspoken prayers. It's the conversation beneath every silence. The sound of the river was like music without notes, melody made of memory. Jonathan, Yaya said, there's another truth you must carry back. Unanswered prayers are not delays. They are assignments. When heaven seems quiet, it's not because God is withholding. It's because you have been invited to become the answer yourself. I looked at her, startled. You mean, when nothing happens, I'm supposed to act? Sometimes, she said. Sometimes silence is a summons. God speaks in what He doesn't change as much as in what He does. The strength you build waiting is often the miracle in disguise. Her words sank deep. I thought of all the times I'd begged for relief, not realizing that waiting had been shaping something eternal inside me. Jesus nodded. Do you remember what I told you when we began this journey? That unanswered prayers are seeds? Well, this is where they bloom. Every silence has its harvest. The river brightened, and images began to rise. Faces of people I'd met, some I'd barely known, each one connected by threads of light that passed through my chest. These, he said, are those who were changed because you prayed, even when you didn't see results. Each act of faith released ripples that touched lives you never met. I watched as one thread led to a man I'd spoken to briefly at a film set, another to a woman who had written a message years ago thanking me for something I'd said in an interview. Each one glowed with living color. The human heart, Jesus said, is more powerful than it believes. When aligned with love, it becomes a conduit through which heaven reshapes earth. Yaya turned to me, her face luminous with peace. Do you see now why silence doesn't mean absence? I nodded slowly. It means cooperation. She smiled. Exactly. We walked further into a grove of trees whose branches shimmered with light. Between them hung scenes from my life, like memories projected onto mist. Every moment I had prayed and felt unheard was here, playing out silently before me. Jesus gestured toward one. Watch closely. It was me, years earlier, sitting in my car late at night, crying out for clarity about my career, my worth, my future. I remembered the exhaustion, the feeling of abandonment. In the vision, light began to bloom around that version of me, faint at first, then steady like dawn slowly overtaking the night. I watched as, without realizing it, I had been surrounded by guidance. The phone call that came the next day, the unexpected kindness of a friend, the opportunity that seemed random, but wasn't. I turned to him. So it wasn't silence. It was synchronization, he said. You called it waiting, but I was rearranging what you couldn't yet see. My silence is never empty. It is structure forming around your faith. For a long time, I didn't speak. My chest ached, not with sorrow, but with recognition. Yaya rested a hand on my arm. The greatest misunderstanding on earth, she said, is that prayer is about words. It's not. It's about alignment. When your heart matches heaven's rhythm, even your breathing becomes prayer. We stopped again beneath a tall tree whose leaves pulsed with golden light. She looked upward and then back at me. You asked me why God didn't save me, she said gently. He did, just not in the way you expected. I was saved from fear, from separation, from the illusion that death could divide us. That's what prayer accomplished. The weight of her words pressed tears from my eyes. I don't want to forget this, I said. You won't, Jesus answered. But you will be tested. Understanding fades if it's not lived. Carry it into your waking world, Jonathan. Live it until others feel it through you. The garden began to shimmer, edges softening, colors deepening into light too brilliant for eyes to hold. I realized time here was ending, if time even existed at all. Yaya hugged me tightly. When you go back, she whispered, don't look for me in the places I was. Look for me in every act of love you give. I will meet you there. Her words were the gentlest goodbye I had ever heard. Jesus placed a hand over my heart. You've seen the unseen, he said. Now go live as one who knows that every silence speaks. The light grew brighter, surrounding everything, until even the sound of the river dissolved. And then, darkness, cold, stone beneath me. The smell of damp earth. I was back in the Prague cemetery, but it wasn't the same. The night no longer felt heavy. The air was alive, vibrating with quiet meaning. My grandmother's headstone shimmered faintly in the moonlight, and I understood now. It wasn't a monument to death, but to connection. A door still open. I knelt beside it, pressing my hand to the cool stone. "Thank you," I whispered, "for hearing me, for teaching me how to listen." The stars overhead flickered brighter, as if they'd been waiting for that sentence. And though I was once again alone in that silent graveyard, I finally knew the truth. Silence had never been God's absence. It was His language, spoken in the pauses, the waiting, the breath between one heartbeat and the next. And in that moment, I wasn't afraid of it anymore. The stars over Prague had started to fade into dawn when I finally stood from my grandmother's grave. My legs ached, my hands were cold, but my heart felt awake for the first time in decades. The silence that had once tormented me now hummed with presence. Every rustle of leaves, every flicker of starlight seemed to whisper the same truth. You were never unheard. The night before had not been a dream. I knew that with a certainty deeper than memory. The scent of the soil, the whisper of Yaya's voice, the warmth of Jesus' hand. Those weren't symbols or imagination. They were encounters that had rewritten my understanding of everything I thought faith was. When I returned to my hotel room, I sat at the small wooden desk and watched the sky lighten through the curtains. I didn't cry. I didn't pray. I just breathed. Each breath felt like agreement, a silent yes to life, to love, to whatever was next. The next day, I boarded my flight back to the States. The hum of the engines became a steady reminder of what I'd learned. That prayers move even when we don't see them, that silence isn't proof of absence, and that love never leaves the room. It just changes its form. When I landed, friends noticed the change before I said a word. Dallas met me at the studio and tilted his head like he was looking at a stranger who felt oddly familiar. "You're different," he said. "I am," I told him. Elizabeth hugged me and whispered, "You look like someone who stopped running." George said quietly, "You look like a man who finally got his answer." They were all right. I had. But the answer wasn't a single sentence. It was a revelation written across every silence I'd ever endured. That night, back home, I couldn't stop thinking about how many people live beneath the same weight I carried. How many hearts keep whispering into the dark, wondering if anyone's listening. So I decided to share what happened. Not because I expect everyone to believe me, but because someone out there needs to know what I now know. That prayer is never wasted, and love never dies. If you're listening to this right now, if you've ever knelt beside a bed or sat in your car at midnight and asked why heaven feels quiet, this is for you. Your prayers are alive. They don't vanish into space or get lost in translation. They move through dimensions you can't yet perceive, building outcomes, forming courage, shaping timing, preparing hearts, including your own. Silence isn't rejection, it's formation. Waiting isn't punishment, it's preparation. And love. Love is not an echo of what used to be. It's the current beneath everything, carrying you even when you think you're standing still. When I asked Jesus why prayers don't get answered, I expected a formula. What I received instead was a relationship. He didn't offer control, he offered communion. He didn't remove pain, he reframed it. He didn't erase time, he expanded it. Now I see how every unanswered prayer was actually shaping the voice that speaks to you right now. How every delay was training my trust. how every silence was teaching me the language of heaven. And maybe that's what this whole journey was about. Not just finding my grandmother's grave, but finding the truth buried beneath my own disbelief. Before I left the cemetery, I whispered one final prayer. It wasn't eloquent. It didn't need to be. "Thank you," I said, "for teaching me how to listen." The air had trembled as if heaven itself exhaled in response. And now, I pray the same for you. Father God, I pray for everyone hearing these words tonight, for the ones who felt forgotten, for those whose prayers seem to vanish into the dark, for hearts heavy with loss, and for souls who ache for answers that haven't yet arrived. Let them know what you showed me, that silence is not your absence, but your artistry, that delay is not denial, but design, and that love, your love, is nearer than breath. Remind them that they are part of something vast, a conversation older than language, a music that began before the world was born. Let them feel the presence of those they've lost, the unseen hands still shaping their days with grace. Let them rest tonight, not in certainty, but in trust. And for the ones still waiting, waiting for healing, for reconciliation, for peace, teach them that what they're waiting for is already unfolding, quietly, perfectly, in ways they can't yet see. In Jesus' name, Amen. When I finished that prayer, the room was silent. But it wasn't empty. It was full, full of the same presence I'd felt in that garden beyond time. The same love that had called me back so I could tell you this story. Here's what I want you to remember. Your prayers don't expire. They don't get lost. They become the architecture of your becoming. Every unanswered plea builds something eternal in you. Every ache is a doorway. Every delay hides a deeper mercy. The quiet seasons of your life are not wasted. They are the wombs of revelation. And when the answer finally comes, you'll see that God wasn't saying no. He was saying, "I'm not done writing yet." So keep praying, keep loving, keep believing that what you can't yet understand will one day be the very thing that makes you whole. When you know that love never ends, fear loses its power. When you realize that prayer isn't about controlling God, but joining Him, despair gives way to wonder. When you trust that silence itself can be holy, your faith stops trembling and begins to sing. The truth I brought home from that night is this: you are more than your outcomes. You are more than your waiting. You are part of a love that transcends endings. And not yet isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of the most beautiful chapter you haven't read yet. So tonight, wherever you are, don't be afraid of the silence. Sit in it. Listen. There's a voice moving beneath it, a presence shaping what comes next. You are heard. You are held. You are loved. And love like this never dies.